Welcome everybody to Trapping Tips and Tricks. It's presented by Neighborhood Cats. And today, hopefully we're drawing from almost 20 years of experience working with feral cats. The folks at Neighborhood Cats have gathered together their favorite ways of catching the wiliest of felines, whether it's putting in a clear rear door, using Spam as bait, wrapping your trap with green garden netting, or training a cat to enter a trap. You're bound to learn something new that will improve your trapping success. Before we jump into talking a little bit about Brian and Susie, I also want to mention that we should save the date for our next webinar, which is going to be on June 29th between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern time, and it's called The Drop Trap, A Trapper's Best Friend. So that's June 29th from 2 to 4 p.m., and you're going to see more about that at the end of the presentation. So this is a tremendous webinar series opportunity that we have this year with Neighborhood Cats, and I'm just so very, very thankful for them partnering with us this year. It's very exciting. So your speaker today is Brian Cordes, and he's the founder and National Programs Director for Neighborhood Cats, a leading community cat advocacy group with hands-on programs in New York City, New Jersey, and Maui. Currently, he and his wife, Susan Richmond, live in Hawaii and can usually be found trapping cats or releasing them after they've been neutered. In between stints with Neighborhood Cats, he served as grants manager for PetSmart Charities, overseeing $21 million in TNR and spay-neuter projects. He has produced many of the leading educational materials on trap, neuter, return, including award-winning books and videos, has assisted numerous communities in setting up large-scale TNR programs, and is a frequent presenter on community cat issues. Brian has a Bachelor of Arts degree from Cornell University and a JD from the University of California in Berkeley. Susan Richmond, Susie, who is also helping us today, is the executive director of Neighborhood Cats. She joined the organization after over 20 years of running a major New York City shelter and nonprofit veterinary clinic. At Neighborhood Cats, she has led multiple large targeted TNR projects in New York City and Northern New Jersey, managed a program for providing scholarships to veterinarians for training in high volume spay neuter of community cats, and co-authored the Humane Society of the United States online course on TNR. In her spare time, she can often be found trapping feral cats on Maui. So at this point in time, I'd like to reach out to Kristen before we turn over things to Brian. Is there anything on the technical side of things, Kristen, you'd like to share with our attendees?
No, I think we're all set to go. So nice and smooth, everybody signing on, good job. And if you have any trouble during the presentation, just let me know.
Excellent. Okay, so Kristen, you are going to send the baton over to Brian, and it looks like Brian is out there.
I am going to do that right now. Brian, you should be getting a request.
I'm not seeing that, but let's see. I'm not seeing a request, Kristen.
Okay, I'm trying a second time.
Nope, I still have that. I'm seeing your screen.
Okay, but has something popped up on your screen?
No.
To make you a presenter?
Nope, not seeing anything.
Okay, hang on one second. You're all going to get a good look at my screensaver for just a second. All right. How about now?
Yep, got it.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to mute myself. If you need me for anything, let me know.
Okay, so you can see my screen now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you, everybody. Appreciate your taking time on a Saturday to learn a little bit more about trapping. Stacy gave a great introduction, so I won't go on too much about who we are, but that's myself on the left. I'm the National Programs Director, and that's Susan Richmond on the right, trying to cajole a cat towards a drop trap. I'll be doing the talking, and Susie and Stacy will be helping out with and Kristen with the questions in the chat. Also want to point out to everybody that there's a handout, which is the Neighborhood Cats TNR Handbook. So you're welcome to download that, and you'll find a lot of information in there too, as regards to trapping, as well as taking care of a colony. So what we're going to talk about today, what we're going to cover, are broadly these general areas. So we're going to talk about the goal with all of this is to catch all the cats, including the real difficult ones. So we're going to talk about what you can do before the trapping ever happens, in the days and weeks beforehand, to prepare and make it more likely that you'll be successful. We're going to cover the different kinds of equipment, including what kinds of traps are out there that you might want to choose from, as well as some esoteric pieces of equipment that you may not know about, including some things that have just come out recently. In the course of that, we're going to demonstrate how you take care of cats in traps, for those of you who are not familiar with that. And then we'll talk about preparing the traps themselves. This would be on the day of trapping. How do you now start to set the traps up before you put them out? We'll cover all kinds of tips and tricks during the trapping itself. And then finally, we'll talk about what we call selective trapping, which is how do you pick out a particular cat or two. So before we get into all this, we're going to run a poll and just kind of find out what level of experience our audience has today. So let's see. Do I launch that poll, Kristen, or is that, let's see.
I can launch it for you if you'd like.
Okay, that'd be great.
Ready? Go.
Okay. So here's your choice. Do you have no trapping experience, 1 year, 1 to 5, 6 to 10, or more than 10 years? And we'll let the poll run, for about a minute. Well, maybe a little bit less, about half a minute.
We're on 21 seconds right now.
Okay.
And it looks like the answers are slowing down.
Okay, great. So we can call that completed, I think. So
All right.
really interesting. Yeah, so we've got, as you can see, about 45% 1 to 5 years, and down on 7% are just starting out, and 21%, which is fantastic, have more than 10 years of experience. So as you can see, we have the whole range here of different levels. I do think it is, if you look at 1 year or more, that's 62, over 83% of you guys have more than 1 year of trapping experience. So that's fantastic. And I'm sure some of this stuff will then be repetitious, a little bit of it, for those of you who have a lot of experience, but I'm pretty sure you'll find at least a few things in here that will be useful. And for those of you who are just starting out, you should be able to walk away with some of the basics, although we're not going to cover all the basics, but you'll get a pretty good idea and also know where to go, including the Neighborhood Cats TNR Handbook. Okay, so moving along. Okay, let's see. To close that. All right, now my screen doesn't want to move now. Oh, here we go. Okay, so when we talk about pre-trapping, the main thing that we're going to be focused on is a feeding pattern. And that's the idea that that's working off the fact that cats are very habitual creatures, and you can train them to get into a routine very quickly. So the way you're going to do that is you're going to feed them at the same time and place, or as close to the same time as possible. And the trick is to pick a time that's good for you. Don't train them to come and eat at 2 in the morning or at a time when normally you're going to be at work or something like that. Also think about the weather and the temperature. So if you're trapping in the summer, you want to train them to come in the early morning when it's still cool out, or around dusk when it's starting to cool off, and they're more likely to want to be around. So also another thing you have to think about with the feeding pattern are other animals. If you have a lot of, here in Hawaii, there are a lot of feral chickens, believe it or not, and when they're out during the daytime, and they're quite aggressive about taking their share of the cat food and the bait. So a lot of trappers here wait until it gets till dusk and the chickens all go to sleep. They go roost in the trees, and then they do trapping. If you're on the other hand, if you're in the Northeast and there's lots of raccoons and possum and skunks, then maybe you want to train the cats to eat during the day, because those animals are much more active at night. So think about that too. And the big tip, which a lot of trappers don't use, is to train the cats when you set up this feeding pattern. Get them used to a specific noise, or sound, I should say. So you might jingle your keys or get a clicker. The same idea with clicker training. Have a certain whistle, clap your hands, blow the horn on your car, whatever it might be. Because when it comes time to trap, you're going to use that sound to draw them out. So if it's not your colony, have the caretaker start to do this and create a unique sound. You'll notice that a lot of the cats already know that, and they are attuned to, it might be just the sound of an engine. So when a specific car pulls up, they'll come running over. We've found that they can be attuned even to the color of the car. So if if they're used to a white pickup truck pulling up, or even more specific, like we have a gentleman where we live who feeds the cats, and he has like a small station wagon, and it's white. And if we pull up in our white SUV, we often fake the cats out, and they think they're about to be fed. So now, just as a little kind of fun thing, I want to show you what a good feeding pattern looks like, and you can see how advantageous it is when it comes time to trap, when you don't have to go out there and try to find the cats, but they're all going to come to you. So we're going to play this video. So there you can see this gentleman feeds the cats every day at around dusk, and you can see there how they gather around waiting for him beforehand, and then all come running over. So when we are trapping at that site, we will, at this point, the cats are all fixed, but every once in a while a new cat shows up. So we're out there with our traps half an hour before dusk, and waiting for all the cats to show up. And then we'll talk about how you use the caretaker to help draw the cats over as well, but we can pretty much count on them being there really at a very specific time. Okay, so moving along. Here's another idea for kind of in support of once you have a feeding pattern, and that's to use a trail camera. And that will also, if it's, you can see if you're trapping in the wintertime and there's snow on the ground, you can study the paw prints. And what you're looking for are, what are their pathways? How do they get to the feeding area? Because you can put traps along those pathways. If you have a trail camera, which are these great devices that are motion activated, so they'll shoot some video or they'll take still shots, whatever you set it at, as soon as a cat enters the camera's infrared field. And they'll work at night. They're waterproof. They're not that expensive. This one that's pictured here is $42. And you can set that up just to make sure that you haven't missed anybody. Maybe there's a mysterious stranger that you can see shows up, but you don't know when, or you don't know what they look like. So having something like this camera out for a week or two before the trapping is going to help you make sure that you're not missing anybody. Now, trap training is another method that you can use for cats before the trapping actually takes place. And I want to give you a case study of a cat that we worked with whose name is Silver Bob, and you'll see why. This is Silver Tabby, who has a bobtail, and that's kind of a natural occurrence around here in Maui. And what happened with this kitty was she was fed, she had a feeding pattern. She was fed daily at 5 o'clock in this landscaped patch of trees just off a busy path in a hotel resort. And you can see in the photo the red circle. That's where she ate. So you can see it's right off of a pathway that was pretty heavily trafficked, not far from the garage from the hotel's pool. And in terms of trapping, you could also see from this photo that a trapper had very limited distance that you could see this spot. So that kind of made it very difficult too. But the biggest problem in trying to catch Silver Bob was that as soon as we put traps out in that area, including a drop trap, she would disappear and she would not come back. And we sat around waiting for hours, and we caught all the other cats that ate in that area. But as soon as it became like, as soon as we showed up, that was it. She was gone. We never even had a shot at her. So the question became, how are we going to catch this cat? So here's the materials that we used in order to camouflage the trap. That was the first thing we decided we had to do. We had to make the trap not look like a trap. So we got a green shade, it's called green shade fabric or sunscreen fabric, and you can see a roll of it there. And you can buy that either at Lowe's or Home Depot. Got a bunch of cable ties, also referred to as zip ties. A bicycle lock so that we could secure the trap onto something. A familiar food bowl, that is really important. One of the things you want to do when you're training a cat to go into the trap is to use things that are familiar to them, and there's nothing that they're more familiar with than what they eat out of. Now, a lesson learned, we didn't do this, and I would in the future, which is to add a floor to the inside of the trap. It could be a piece of cardboard, something that you could remove and easily clean, because what happens if you don't add a floor over the course of the training period, which in this case took a few weeks, several weeks actually, it can get really quite dirty in there, and the smell can start to become a problem in terms of attracting the cat. So stick a floor in there. Then what we did was we put the food bowl that she was used to eating out of a safe distance away from the trap. And we took the trap and we locked it onto a tree. around the trunk of a tree, and we took the rear door away. And that's important because obviously this is a more public place. We didn't think anybody would try to steal the trap, but it rendered the trap ineffectual. Nobody was going to be able to catch a cat while we weren't around, as long as there wasn't a rear door in the area. We also put it under a tree so that it would be protected from the rain, and we covered it with dirt and leaves to further camouflage it and make it less alarming to Silver Bob. And you can see that as long as the food bowl, we started out with the food bowl far enough away from the front of the trap, she was comfortable coming over and eating. So she's getting used to the presence of the trap in that way. Now, one mistake you can see from this photo is look how big the bowl was that we used, which is great, but when it came time to trap and set the trap, that bowl was not going to fit in the rear of the trap and not interfere with the trip plate. So if you can, you want to use a food container they're used to that's small enough to then use as a bait dish. And if you can't do that, and in this situation, we probably could not have done that because there were multiple cats. There were 6 or 7 cats who ate at this spot. And if we put out one small bowl, it wouldn't have held enough food. Now, we might have put out 6 or 7 small ones. That might have been a strategy. But another idea is we could have had a smaller steel bowl on hand that looked a lot like this bigger one, just smaller in scale, that would have fit. So if you're using a large feeding container, have a smaller, similar one at hand that you'll be able to use at the time of trapping. So the trick when you're doing this is to allow the cat to set the pace. You're waiting till they're comfortable eating, and then you're moving the bowl ever so slightly closer to the front of the trap. So the 2 photos you see here actually transpired over the course of like a couple of weeks before Kitty was actually, I would say more like 3 weeks before Kitty actually was sticking her head inside the trap. Now, a lot of cats, you'll be able to move faster. I mean, I think the rule that you should follow is wait till they're eating out of the bowl and they're comfortable being near the trap, and then let them eat out of it for a day or 2, and then inch it closer, maybe like 6 inches or a foot, and just keep letting the cat set the pace. Wait until they're comfortable eating at that spot before you move the trap further in. So we just kept gradually moving the trap until it was just inside the front door, as you can see. And then finally, we got to the point where she was eating inside the trap, and we were able to then set the trap, put the rear door back on, put the bait in the back, and wait until she went all the way in. It did take a couple of tries. She didn't go in the first day that we set the trap, but she did go in the second. And we were able to get our elusive kitty. So this actually took place, this particular case, over the course of 6 weeks. And we knew we had time because she had given birth before, we had tried to catch her before she gave birth, and that's when we discovered that she wouldn't get anywhere near us. So we knew she had kittens, and we knew we had to wait until the kittens were old enough, like 5-6 weeks old, for us to take in and get them adopted. So we knew we had plenty of time to train her. So that was very helpful. But we probably, if we weren't concerned about the kittens, we probably could have accelerated the process and maybe gotten her in half the time. Instead of 6 weeks, maybe like 3 weeks. Okay, the most basic tip when it comes to the pre-trapping is that Kitty is very hungry. So all the tips and tricks that we're going to go over today, our experience is that you could use all of them, and you should, because there are some really tough cats out there, and no matter what you do. But for the most part, you're going to catch cats if they're very hungry. That is the number one biggest factor in catching the vast majority of them. You could do like almost everything wrong, but if they're starving, I shouldn't say starving, if they're very, very hungry, they're going to go in. And we've seen that in locations. That's a funny sound. We've seen that in locations where we've come up, we didn't intend to withhold food, but the caretaker was gone all of a sudden, and we were alerted to the cats, and they hadn't eaten in several days, and they would just go flying into the traps. So don't want to underestimate how important that is. So with most cats, what you're going to do is withhold the food. If you're using normal box traps like we've been showing, you're going to withhold the food for like 24 to 48 hours. And if you have kittens on site or ill or injured cats, then don't withhold the food for more than 24, because kittens need to eat a lot more often. And if a cat is sick and eating, you want to keep them that way. If you're using a drop trap, which we'll talk a little bit about today, you normally would withhold the food for 24 hours. So they would have their normal meal on Tuesday. The caretaker would take the food away after the meal, and then you would trap the next day, 24 hours later, when they wouldn't have eaten that day. Often though, with drop traps, you'll find that as long as they haven't, even if they ate Tuesday night, if they haven't eaten Wednesday at all, and you're trapping Wednesday afternoon, the cats are not as afraid of drop traps, and they don't need to be nearly as hungry in order to get them to go in. Check the site beforehand. This is an oversight that trappers, a mistake that we've often made. And you're assuming everybody is following your instructions. Withhold the food, take it away the day before. You give very, very clear instructions, and everybody agrees they're going to do that. And then you show up on the day of trapping, and there's a giant bowl of dry food sitting in the middle of your trapping area. And I know I had one experience once where I just looked at the caretaker, and I was like, what is this? And her response was, I thought you meant wet food. So you want to, if you can, go by the site the day before at least once, or have somebody go by, or check in with the caretaker and just be really sure that nobody is leaving food out. Also, caretakers often struggle with not feeding the cats for a day or two. It's just a psychological thing. I mean, it'd be like, I guess, if your cat's at home and you didn't feed them for a day or two, it really, and then you're continuing to see them, it really tugs on your heartstrings, and not everybody is strong enough to just let that go. So do be careful and do check. Okay, so at this point, I think we're going to take any questions that may have come up about what we've covered so far.
Yep, I'm just getting myself sorted through here, trying to group things through. Kristen, if you're out there, I'm also going to have us take a couple of seconds to, we've had a couple people with some technical issues, so she might share a couple of tips on that. Do you want to do that now, Kristen, or you want me to do some questions first?
Why don't you do some questions first, and let me take a look at what's in here. I did see a few questions, but they've disappeared since they were answered. So I'll catch back up, and just give me a heads up when you are ready to have a few technical tips.
Okay, all right. So big topics that came up right in the beginning of your conversation, and Brian, certainly say if you're going to cover this later in the presentation, just say I'm going to defer the question.
Sure.
But lots of medical issues, concerns about trapping cats with medical issues, releasing cats that have potentially untreated medical issues, pain considerations. We've had several questions around that topic.
Well, if you have sick kitties, then and you're able to afford to have them seen by a veterinarian, or hopefully there's a clinic that will help you out, then of course you want to trap them and get them treated, and then hold them as long as you can during the treatment. So it can be challenging if the problem is that the cat has a stuffy nose for whatever reason. They may have an upper respiratory infection, so they're not breathing well, and that interferes with their sense of smell, and that can make it difficult to bait the traps and tempt them towards them. But usually they're not so clogged up that you can't use like we'll be talking about bait, but if you use something really extra smelly, like a sardines or something like that. We recently trapped a pretty sick cat by putting chopped sardines under a drop trap. One of our trappers did that, and the kitty went under. So that's what you need to do. As far as releasing sick cats, well, we're going to show you how to take care of cats in traps. And we have held cats in their trap, using the trap as a cage, well, when they were sick for up to 2 weeks. And that at first, people who aren't used to that are like, oh my God, isn't that cruel? And it's not at all, especially if they're a feral cat. They actually are much more comfortable in a trap than if you put them in a large cage. They don't want to be in open space. They want to be in covered, tight, darker spaces. And if they're sick and you just are taking care of them during the course of their antibiotics or whatever it is, they're perfectly fine. And then once they're better, then you would let them go.
Okay, great. I have one other quick trapping, and then we're going to have some questions about equipment and the cameras. But the last sort of trapping question is, what do you do when you're stuck retrapping already neutered cats?
Well, we're going to stick around to the end. We're going to talk about a kitten, a neutered kitten that we had to retrap 2 days after we released her. And we had to really dig deep into our bag of tricks that we're covering today. But it is entirely possible. I mean, a quick answer to that is try to use a different kind of trap. So if you caught them in a box trap, try to use a drop trap, or vice versa. Also camouflaging, which is something we'll talk about, so that the trap doesn't look the same as the first time they went in. It's not an easy thing, but it absolutely it can be done.
And on the inverse side of that, I've heard lots of stories too about like the same cat going in the same trap all the time. So that would be like an area for the drop trap instead?
It depends on the kind of trapping you're doing. If you're doing like a mass trapping and you're trying to catch the entire, as many cats as you can at once, and you put out, like a dozen or 2 dozen box traps, and you have a cat who keeps coming in, the simple way to solve that is just don't let the cat go. Cover the trap, put the kitty aside, and when your trapping is over, let the cat go.
2 other questions, and then we'll keep moving on. And folks, if I haven't covered your question, don't worry, I've got my list here, and we'll cover it later on if Brian doesn't get it covered in the presentation. Lots of questions about your favorite trap brands, as well as a question about a clam trap, where to get or build. So those were 2 of the specific trap questions, as well as can you camouflage a drop trap?
Well, we're going to, our very next section, we're going to talk about equipment, and we're going to talk about traps, and we're going to ask you what kind of traps you use now. So we'll definitely get to that.
Good.
As far as disguising a drop trap goes, well, we're having using a drop trap, again, we're going to cover it briefly today, but it's such a fantastic tool. We at Neighborhood Cats, we use it pretty much every time we go out and trap. At some point, we're using a drop trap. And there's all sorts of tips and tricks that are unique to that. And we decided really to do it justice. We're going to dedicate an entire webinar just to using drop traps. So that will be on June 29th, and the information for registering will be at the end of this webinar. So stay tuned. Just a real quick answer to that, in case you can't attend, is you can camouflage a drop trap in the same way as a box trap. You can get green sunshade, you can get burlap, and you get clothespins, and just tack it on. You can cover it with leaves and branches. You can put it in a corner, try to lean a board over one side of it, perhaps. Anything that will make it look a little bit different will help.
And then the last question is about the cameras. Are they like Wi-Fi and motion enabled?
They're all motion enabled. So in other words, when you set them up, they're not just running continuously. They send out an infrared field, and when a cat enters that infrared field, and it goes out to about 65 feet, so it's quite a distance, then it will start to record. And it will record either still shots or video. I think at night it might only record still shots. But as far as Wi-Fi and those kinds of things, you can get almost any feature you want. It just depends on how much you're willing to pay. So there's just if you go onto Amazon and you do a search for trail cameras, you'll just find dozens of different varieties of them. And the more features like Wi-Fi and things like that, the more expensive it's going to be. So that camera that we showed, the 8-man, is a pretty good basic camera, but it doesn't send out a Wi-Fi signal. Yeah, you have to go and download the images that it takes.
Okay. Kristen, if you're out there, you want to do a couple technical advisory things to our group?
Yep, absolutely. So the thing that I have been seeing is two different concerns, is that people are either losing audio or we're not able to get audio. There's a couple of things I'd ask you to check, and a few of them, please don't hate me, but the first is if your volume is up, so just double check that you actually have your volume on. The second thing that I'd like you to check is in your little control panel for GoToWebinar, you should see a box that's labeled audio, and there's a little triangle next to it. You can go ahead and hit that triangle and it will open up to show you a microphone and then a speaker. And you can see in the drop downs underneath it what speaker and microphone it's using. Now your microphone's not going to matter because you're muted, but the speaker, if it says anything other than like your computer speakers that you want, or your headphones, if you're using Bluetooth headphones, they should have a name. You can hit that drop down, you can see your options, and you can go ahead and try a few different options. The other thing you can do is you can call in on your phone. Sometimes if you have a slower internet speed, or maybe you're having, everybody in the neighborhood is watching something on Netflix right now, you can go ahead and call in. The phone number is 1-914-614-3221, and you'll be asked for an audio pin. The audio pin for attendees is 721-826-158. So I'll just repeat that real quick. The phone number to call in is 1-914-614-3221, and the attendee audio pin is 721-826-158. And that should be able to get you the sound via your phone. If for some reason you're losing, a couple of people have said the video froze on them, that also is likely an internet speed issue. There's not a whole lot I can do about that. But this is being recorded, so after, if you're able to watch the presentation and everything and just the videos freezing, we'll have all of that for you within about 24 hours. We'll send out a link to everybody who's attended that they can go and take a look. It'll be on YouTube, it'll be on our website, it'll be on everywhere we can possibly put it. So you'll have an opportunity to see it. And the other thing you can always do is you can sign out of the webinar. You still have your link, and you can go ahead and sign back in. There's, you might miss a couple of seconds, but sometimes restarting is the best way to kind of get your computer to do what it needs to do. So if you do continue having problems, let me know. Hopefully some of those suggestions help some of you guys. There hasn't been a lot of technical questions, but it sounds like it's frustrating for a few of you guys. So stick with it, and let me know if you continue having issues. Is that the only things you saw as well, Stacy?
Yeah, that's great. Excellent. I appreciate you chiming in. And now we're going to turn the microphone back over to Brian.
Okay, great. So next we're going to, that was a great question, whoever asked about brands of traps and things like that, because that's exactly where we are right now. So the choice of trap is kind of the first and most important equipment decision that you're going to make. So it's really important to understand that there are really good traps for catching community cats, and then there are traps that are not as good. And the differences between them can be really critical in your trapping success. So before we get going into that, we'd like to find out what exactly you use right now. So Kristen, can we launch that poll on, yes, so we're going to launch this poll, and the questions are, what kind of trap is your brand of choice right now? And we'll just give that about 30 seconds for everybody to weigh in. So interesting. Yeah, we have an experienced crowd here today for sure.
Just let me know when you're ready to close.
Okay, I think we can close it now.
Okay.
All right, great. So really interesting. 47% tomahawk, 36% true catch, only 3% safeguard, and 16% some other brand, and 21% whatever I can get my hands on, which is completely understandable because a trap is much better than no trap. But when you do have a choice and you're thinking about ordering, then you know, it's not just whatever's around, but what decision that you make. And interestingly enough, what we're going to get into is that the two brands that we recommend are Tomahawk and True Catch. So here we are with the Tomahawk traps. We have worked, Neighborhood Cats has worked closely with the Tomahawk Live Trap Company to take what had originally been traps that were designed mostly for raccoons or other animals and turn them into traps that were feral cat friendly. And what you see here are the different features that we had them add. So we made, I would say the most critical change we made was the size of the trip plate. It used to be that the trip plate was maybe about half that size, and our experience, and we think a lot of other trappers' experience, was that cats would just step over it and start eating the bait, which was, you know, a very frustrating thing to see. So we had them make the trip plate about twice as long, and that problem has been pretty largely eliminated now. Some of the other smaller things, we had them make a much larger hand guard. So your particularly fractious kitties cannot reach through and try to scratch your hands. We made the handles extra long, and we had them have 2 handles instead of 1 to make it much easier to carry the trap once you've got a cat in there. We had them simplify the rear door lock so that now it's just a simple clip that goes through an attached loop. So, you know, sure, sometimes people still forget to use it. But we found before, when we were picking up cats from clinics using not just Tomahawk, but other kinds of traps, especially we started out using Safeguard, and we just found we were constantly getting unlocked rear cats back in traps with unlocked doors, which was, you know, a real safety issue for the cat and for us. Another element that we had them add was that, you know, how cats try to go to the back of the trap and reach in and grab the bait rather than have to go through the front door. So we had them make the mesh of the squares that you see on the sides of the trap. We had them make them smaller towards the rear of the trap so that kitties can't get in and reach them. As with everything, you know, there are pluses and there are minuses. The main negative to a Tomahawk trap that and why some trappers prefer the True Catch is that it's what we call spring loaded, meaning that the front door is on a spring, kitty steps on the trip plate, and then the front door slams shut. And there's a couple problems with that. The main problem is that it's loud, and potentially can frighten other cats away. Now, in our experience, kitties that are frightened away usually come back if you're patient and you give them a little bit of time. They're still hungry. They still know there's food there. They get over that initial surprise, and then they start to come back. But still, if you're working in a tight space and you're trying to catch 10 cats in a courtyard, it can be very disconcerting to have a lot of loud traps, going off. So there's also, we've never had this happen, but it's a concern that's often voiced, which is that potentially the slamming of the door could injure a cat who, let's say one cat was in the back and eating the bait, and another cat had started to stick his head in the front door, and all of a sudden the door comes slamming down on him. I think that's really much more of a worry when you've got young kittens. I don't think that the door is going down hard enough to injure an adult cat, but I would suspect that there are those of you out there who may have had that experience. So that would be a safety issue. But other than that, it's an extremely well-made trap. It's quite durable. You can get them, if you pay a little more, you can get it powder coated. We haven't found that necessary because they don't seem to rust unless you leave them outside all the time. So really good workhorse of a trap. Excellent company that's been around a long time, family-owned business. They're also a company that if you have ideas, if you want something customized, they're very open to listening to you about that. So the different models that exist, the standard that we use most of the time is the 606 NC, and that's 30 inches long by 10 by 12. Now, you can also get it a little bit smaller if you're looking for a little bit less weight. That would be the 605 NC. We used to use, and in New York City, our program there still uses the 608 NC as the standard trap, and that's the 36-inch version. And the reason for that is you're going to see we use traps as cages, and the 36-inch one definitely gives them more space during their confinement. Here in Maui, we've pretty much gone over to the 30-inch ones as our favorite ones because we find that is enough space for them when they're being confined, and it's just easier to move around with a shorter trap. But they're both excellent. Now there's also the 206 NC, which we helped Tomahawk design, and that's a collapsible trap. That's the 30-inch version, but it collapses flat. And it's also, if you've used collapsible traps in the past, the main problems with them were that they were just never very sturdy. They had too many moving parts, and they would like bend in the middle, and they were just just unsatisfactory. Usually what would happen is people would eventually just leave them uncollapsed and tie them into place and not bother. But so we designed this so that it's quite sturdy when you snap it open, and it snaps open in literally seconds, and it lies flat. So if your concern is storage space or transporting traps around, they're great. The downside to them is that, and we're working with Tomahawk on this, is they use these things called roll hooks to attach a lot of the pieces together once it's open. And when the trap is lying flat, these roll hooks are loose, and you're laying them down on top of one another, and one trap's roll hooks get caught in the other trap that they're on top of, and then it becomes like this nightmare to separate them. So if you do use these collapsible traps, the way to get around that is when you collapse them and you pile them on top of each other, put a sheet or a towel in between them, and then the roll hooks won't get caught. We also, when the rear doors on the collapsibles end up being attached with roll hooks too. So what we do, once we have a cat in a collapsible trap, we'll zip tie the rear door frame onto the main door frame, just as a safety measure. They're great for, like, what we use them for is we have an SUV, we can fit like 15 traps in there, but we know there are 20 cats to catch. Well, then we can slide in another 5 or 6 collapsible traps just lying flat and have enough equipment. Of course, we're always faced with the problem if we do get the 20 cats that we can't fit them in the car, but that's a problem we'd rather deal with than not having enough equipment. So let's go to the other favorite of experienced trappers, and that's the true catch trap. And this has, unlike the spring-loaded Tomahawk, this is a gravity-driven front door. There are no springs, so a cat steps on that trip plate and the front door will close based on just the weight of it. It's designed, it's very clever design, where there are two, what would you call them, crossbars that rest against each other. Over on the left, of the top left, you can't really see them in this photo, but they rest against each other, and the weight on the trip plate separates them, and the front door slides down. You see those rings at the top of the front door? Well, those rings will slide down and lock the front door once a cat's in there. So there's no safety issues, and they're very quiet, which is a great thing when you're trapping a lot of cats. The trip plate comes large, which is great. The powder coating is standard. The rear door it slides up and down, but it remains attached at all times, so you don't ever lose it. And you can also position the rear door when you're you have a cat in there and you're feeding and cleaning. You can prop the rear door open, which is a nice little convenience. So now the downsides, again, everything's plus and minus here. The downsides are that there's no automatic locks on the front or rear door, unlike the Tomahawk. So once the Tomahawk front door shuts, that's it. It's not going to open again. The rear door has a lock on it. So there's no locks on the True Catch. And the problem there, if the trap gets knocked over, if it rolls over, especially the front door, it could pop open. So, and the rear door too is not secured. Now, there is an easy way around that, which is you can see the carabiners down there at the bottom. And if you, once you put the bait in the back door, you put a clip on the rear door to make sure it stays shut. Once you've caught a cat, you clip the front door. You clip the bottom of the front door to the bottom of the base of the trap. And as long as you do that, you won't have any problems with cats escaping. And what we'll do is, and this was a practice we learned from the folks at the Maui Humane Society, is always have a couple of carabiners clipped to the trap itself, so that they're always there, like it's a part of the trap, and have plenty of spare carabiners with you too at all times. Now, another problem with this trap, especially if you're not experienced, is that you have to set the trigger properly. If you can set it in a way where it will require too much weight for the trap to go, for the front door to shut. On the other hand, you could set it so lightly that it's too sensitive and it goes off too easily. Now, the trick with cats usually is just that the crossbars are at right angles, and then you won't have any problem. And that, if you're an experienced trapper, that's not something you're going to forget, and it's not going to be an issue. We have found that if it's people who are inexperienced or only trapping the one time, we do a lot of public training workshops in New York City, for example. And when we lent out True Catch traps, people were just constantly making mistakes with it. So the tendency that we've seen is that people who trap a lot tend to prefer the True Catch in our experience. But if people are not trapping a lot and you're lending traps out to the public, the Tomahawks are probably a much better fit because they're much simpler and easier to use. Okay. Now, let's say you're one of those 3% who are using Safeguard, or you're just happy to get your hands on whatever trap you can find. Then there's a good chance you're going to have that problem I talked about, which is the trip plate is too small, and that was when we used to use safeguard traps. This is how we got around that, which is cut a piece of cardboard the width of the trap, about 9 inches long, maybe 8, and tape it to the center, not at the end, but the center of the trip plate. And now you've effectively extended it. And as long as the cat steps on the cardboard, the trap's going to go off. Now, if you extend it too far forward, like all the way to the front door, the danger is that you've extended the trip plate too far, and a cat step, if the cardboard's really stiff, for example, the trap may go off before they're in far enough to be caught. So we recommend not extending it more than 8 or 9 inches. Trap dividers, for those of you who don't know them, they're these little pitchfork looking things. And they're really important for taking care of cats in traps. We recommend to have 1 or 2 of them when you're out in the field as well. So if you happen to catch 2 cats in the same trap, you can quickly separate them. If you have a cat who's really frantic and not calming down when you cover them with a sheet, then you can minimize the amount of space they have to move around in by inserting a divider. They're also useful for doing transfers between traps and other containers. The most important thing to keep in mind here is that there's almost every trap manufacturer has some form of a divider that they offer, but the only 2 brands that are strong enough for the purposes that we're talking about today, especially caring for cats and traps, are the True Catch and the Tomahawk. And they're both of equal value, whichever you can get. Which is easier or cheaper for you to get is fine. So, been referring to caring about cats and traps, and we have a short, like a 3-minute video that will demonstrate that process for those of you who are not familiar with that technique at this point. And here we go.
Log the cats as they come in, identifying both their trap number and the colony they came from. It's especially important to do this if you're trapping multiple colonies at the same time. The traps become cages which the cats never leave prior to release, except during the spay-neuter surgery. To set the trap up as a cage, start at the front door. Get the cat to move to the opposite end by pulling back the sheet. Ferals tend to move from light to dark. Insert 2 trap dividers back to back from above. You should always use 2 because the occasional cat is strong enough to push his way through 1. Open the door and place newspaper on the floor. Always remove any dirty newspaper and waste before putting fresh newspaper in. Shut the front door, remove the dividers, and cover up the front end of the trap again with the sheet. Go to the rear door and again pull back the sheet. Then insert the dividers. Open the door and place newspaper inside. Then put in food and water. The water should be in a low, flat container to help prevent it from getting knocked over. Close the rear door, double checking to make sure the latches are secure. Then remove the dividers and cover the back of the trap with the sheet. This method of feeding and cleaning should be done twice a day to minimize smell and to keep the cats as comfortable as possible. Sometimes the light to dark trick doesn't work and the cat won't move. Try tapping the side of the trap lightly and shooing the cat. If that doesn't work, you might need to use one of the trap dividers to give him a little push. Contrary to many people's first reaction, it's fine to keep cats in traps for several days. Feral cats actually prefer tight dark spaces over something like a large open cage, and they adapt quickly.
Okay, apologize for any kind of audio double echo that was there, but you basically can see the idea. One thing I want to mention since we've made this video is we don't use separate water dishes anymore because they knock them over so often. So what we do is we use primarily wet food while the cats are confined, and then if you add approximately a tablespoon of water, unless the cat has some type of medical issue, that's going to be enough for them. If you give mostly or all dry food while they're confined, then you do need to add water separately. Another trick that we use is if you have a very fractious cat, some of them are able to, even with the two dividers in like that, they can reach through and go at your hand. That doesn't happen very often, but when you do have a cat who's trying to do that, we'll use barbecue tongs, those long tongs that you can get anywhere, any hardware store or online, and we'll use those to pull the dirty newspaper out and not put our hands anywhere close to the cat. Also, a final tip is if you don't have two dividers, the safest way to do this is to take one divider and insert it horizontally through the sides of the trap. Just make sure that the end of the divider is sticking all the way out the other side, and then there's no way that a cat can get through that. The reason we recommend two is that, yeah, sometimes every once in a while there's a cat who's strong enough to push his way through one. Also notice that when you insert the dividers, angle them towards the cat, which makes it less likely that he'll be able to push it towards you. If you use two, we've never had a cat escape using two back to back like that. Okay, here's a kind of something, a new product that's come on the market that we've helped design, and that's what we call trap mats. And you can buy them pre-cut. They're basically, they line the floor of the trap. They make it, there are cats who are uncomfortable stepping on the wire floor. So if you give them a nice soft surface, they're going to be less hesitant to go in. So that's one advantage to what we call a trap mat. And then also you can leave a trail of bait leading into the trap, which we'll demonstrate to you later. So you can buy them pre-cut for all tomahawk traps at livetrap.com. Now, if you want to do it yourself, you can get these much cheaper if you buy the material yourself and then cut it up. And the material that what we found is on Amazon is the rubber cow coin grip metallic PVC. And if you get a ruler and a Sharpie, you measure out the size mats that you want, and then you can use a sharp scissors, or even better is if you have a heavy duty paper cutter like that's pictured there, then you can get through it pretty quickly. And for, I think the mats sell at Tomahawk for maybe an average of $15 to $20 each. If you buy a roll and you cut it yourself, you're going to get the cost down to something like $4 each. So it's a considerable savings if you have a lot of traps that you're using. Now you can also just cut cardboard and be sure to tape it down if it's windy outside. The disadvantage to cardboard is that you have to cut it every time that you go trapping because you can't reuse them. With the PVC, they're easy to clean, and you can just keep using them over and over again. So for those of you who are not familiar with this concept, again, we have just a real quick video. Okay, so you can see Violet wasn't too upset. She was much more concerned with eating the bait than with us trapping her. But you can see how she followed that trail all the way into the trap. Okay, so quickly, just a few other equipment hacks. There's what we designed, another little implement that we designed with Tomahawk is a clear rear door, and that's on the upper left, and you can kind of see how clear it is because you can't see it. But it basically is the same size as the normal rear door, but it's made of plexiglass. And often cats are hesitant to enter traps into anything where they don't see a way out. So you can trick them with the clear rear door into thinking like, oh, I'm not entering a confined space. The only thing to keep in mind is that you must be on site and visually monitoring the traps if you use these clear rear doors, because what happens is once the cat is trapped, they keep thinking that's a way out, and they will run up against that rear door, and you need to be able to cover it very quickly to make sure that they don't hurt themselves. But we have found it to be very effective. A pair of binoculars is always a good thing to have on hand. If you're working at night, make sure you have headlamps. You'll never trap at night without one again. It's great, you can see, your hands are free. If you find that the handles, especially when cats are in the traps, are really, especially in very cold weather, are kind of cutting to your hands when you're lifting them, if you take a garden hose and chop it up and tape it onto the handles, you'll have a nice, comfortable way to carry the traps. On the bottom there, we have another piece of equipment you can get from Tomahawk for Tomahawk traps, and that's what we call the kitten screen. And the basic idea there is that if you're after kitten, you only want to catch the kittens. Maybe your spay-neuter appointment is in 2 weeks, but you've got some 6-week-old kittens and you cannot wait to get them because now they're at the prime age to socialize and get adopted out, but you really don't want to catch an adult. You can put the kitten screen into the trap and only the kittens will be able to fit through and get to the trip plate. Again, you know, it's safer not to use other techniques that we'll show you, like a bottle and a string or a drop trap, where you can make sure that there are no kittens that could get hit by the front door. But sometimes you're desperate and you can't do that. And in our experience, you know, we recognize that it's a risk, but we haven't had a kitten hurt at this point. Now you can, if you don't have a Tomahawk or you don't want to buy the kitten screen, you can make your own. And that you can see on the lower right, you can take a piece of cardboard, cut it the width of the trap and the height, and then just cut out a little corner that only a small kitten can fit through and attach the whole thing to the trap using twist ties or zip ties. And then there's the drop traps. And just so you're aware of, again, we're going to have a whole webinar on how to use them. But the only one that's mass manufactured is the one that we co-designed with Tomahawk, the neighborhood cats drop trap, and you can see it folds flat. And but you can build your own. And if you go to this website, drop trap design blogspot.com, you'll find a number of plans there for how to make them either collapsible or non-collapsible. And in the end, they work just as well. They're not as easy. You can't clean them the way that you can clean a metal trap. That would be the one big disadvantage. Okay, so I think before we move on to the next section, we can take some questions.
Okay, great. This is excellent information. I've been capturing lots of notes here. My chicken scribbles all over the place here. So one question is about what do you use for cleaning and disinfecting the cages, the traps?
Well, it's a kind of a 3-step process. First you hose them down and make sure any loose debris is removed, because a disinfectant won't work if it's on top of debris. So first hose them down, top and bottom. And then we use Rescue, which is a hydrogen peroxide based solution. You can get online. I know Tomahawk distributes it. I believe there are other companies that do as well. And you can buy, it's an expensive item, but if you do a lot of trap cleaning, you want to buy one. It's a dispenser that you attach to a hose, and it will spray the rescue out in a preset formula. You just cover the trap with the foam, let it sit for several minutes, and then wash it off. So if you have that type of disinfectant and you have a hose attachment, you can clean any number of traps in a matter of 10 or 15 minutes.
And then two other sort of somewhat quick questions. If you do not have access to using a divider, how long would you recommend holding a cat in a trap?
Well, you want to hold a cat overnight after surgery. So, you can, if you're really careful, you can slip some food. When you pick the cat up from the clinic, ask them to paper the bottom, ask them to paper the floor, so that for at least that night, you don't have to worry about them having clean paper. And then when you want to feed them, you can slide the rear door ever so slightly open and slip in some food. But I wouldn't try to do that for more than like one night.
And someone has said that they're having success trapping cats using a dog crate. Are there any pitfalls to that you can think of?
Well, the biggest pitfall I think would be getting the cat out of the dog crate. That you always have to think about that part of it. I think it is when you're capturing them in a larger space, like a dog crate, then they are more likely to go in. The more room there is, the less intimidated they'll be. But getting a feral cat out of a dog crate can be, very risky to you and to the cat, and high risk of escape. So I would rather use a drop trap, which is a 3 foot by 3 foot space, and it has a system for getting the cat out.
Quick question on the kitten screen placement. How far away from the trip plate should the screen be placed? How far away should it be from the trip plate?
So you could see in the photo, it's like, we're talking a couple of inches. Just far enough so that when they first step through the screen, they're not immediately stepping on the plate, because you don't want them to be halfway in. So just to, you can see what looks like three of the squares, which would be like, I think 2 to 3 inches in front of the trip plate.
And then just last is like a comment. One group has had good success trapping kittens using squirrel traps. And so they're just mentioning that they have done that, and they seem to be easily accessible in stores and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. In fact, I think that's probably a pretty good idea. I have seen, adult cats squeeze themselves into squirrel traps, but I think the chance of that happening as opposed to catching the kittens is relatively small. So yeah, I would say that's an excellent tip, to use squirrel traps for kittens. And I think it's probably safer than using the kitten screen in a normal size trap.
Great. All right. We can move on.
Okay, great. So now we're up to trapping day, and we're going to talk a little bit now about just preparing the traps themselves before you put them out there. And here's just a couple of quick tips. If you've got sticky moving parts, which can happen as traps age, just spray the trigger area, the trip plate area, all the parts that move, with a non-stick vegetable oil, which you can find in the bakery aisle. And if you get a butter flavor, that will help attract the cats. Another thing you can use to attract cats to the trap is just spray a little catnip spray, mostly on the trip plate and in the rear. But make sure whenever you're using catnip, do not overdo it. I was after a cat for about 5 or 6 years, and I put a trap. I studied her, and I found her path of travel, and I put a trap right where she would go. And then I sprinkled a little catnip. I made a little catnip trail leading into the trap. And sure enough, she came along, she walked right up to the trap, she sniffed the catnip, and then she started rolling around on the ground in front of the trap, enjoying herself, and then got up and walked away. So only, use the catnip inside the trap and don't overdo it. Camouflage, we talked about using the green shade fabric, also known as sunshade or sunscreen fabric, which you can get at most home improvement stores. Other types of camouflage are you can wrap the trap in burlap, cover it with leaves and sticks and dirt, like you can see in the photo there, how it really blends into the scenery. You can also use contractor bags in the photo on the lower right. That will, again, change the appearance. It's also great if you're trapping and it might rain, or the rain is going on and off, and you want to protect the cat if the cat's trapped, and also protect the bait. Just make sure you don't cover the rear door or obviously the front door. And if it's really raining hard, what I would do is take that trap and probably put it on like a board, something that will lift it up off the ground an inch or two, in order to make sure that the water doesn't pool on the ground and on the bottom of the trap. Use duct tape like we did there to wrap it and get the contractor bag tight. When your traps come in boxes, don't throw the boxes away. Those are perfect camouflage. You can cut out obviously the bottom of the box and the top of the box, and just slip the trap right in there and set it. Also put the trap under things, put them under bushes, under boards that they might fit under. Anything that will blend them into the scenery will make the traps less frightening to the kitties. Now, I want to emphasize that we generally go for trying what's easiest first. So we'll just put our traps out with our normal setups without camouflaging them, because most of the cats don't need this type of effort. But when you get down to the ones who are really difficult, these kinds of tricks can make the difference in catching them. Okay, ant moats. I'll bet a lot of you, especially if you are trapping in a field or any place that is open, but sometimes indoors, we've had this happen in warehouse and stuff. You put your bait dish down and you come back 20 minutes later and it's crawling with ants, and it's not exactly attractive to any cat. So one way around that is to make a little moat. And what you do is you find these waterproof containers. Like on the left there, we found the smaller one was a baby food jar, plastic jar. And on the right were these small baking pans, and we actually used the top, but you could also use the bottom. And you can see on the right, we put the bait in the smaller container, filled the larger one with water, and then put the smaller container into the water. And excuse me, fortunately, ants don't swim, so this will keep them out of your bait for a considerable period of time. Another real simple tip, which a lot of you probably already do, which is unless it's a windy day and the sheets are going to start blowing around, tuck the sheets in the handles, especially if you're trapping a lot of cats at once, like this gentleman was doing. And that way, when cats start going in, you're not running up to the trap and seeing like, oh, cat's not ear tipped, and then having to run back to the car to find a sheet. The sheet's just right there for you. Make sure you cut your sheets large enough that they cover the trap generously and don't make them form-fitting if they're loose, because the trap will get twisted and pulled and stuff as you're carrying it. So make sure the sheets are larger than the traps. Bait, always a favorite topic. So let's see. At this point, I think we have do we have a poll on this? Yes. What's your favorite bait? So before we start giving you ideas, we want to find out what you're using. So let's open the poll. and let that go for a few seconds, 30 seconds or so.
Look at those answers coming in.
Yeah,
Everybody has a
bait is a
favorite.
passionate topic among trappers. It really is. And we're tilted heavily towards the fish side, that's for sure.
Which is surprising because I've always found the rotisserie chickens from the grocery store are stellar.
Well, you know, that's why we have we're in a democracy here, so we can
close the poll.
Yep, close the poll. Well, you know, I'm a little surprised because I would have thought tuna would have won the day, but a lot of people are onto sardines, and that's a really good one. Sardines are great. You know, as you say, roasted chicken is really good. Tuna's a kind of a standard. Canned cat food can be great, especially if you use like a Fancy Feast or something like that. I'm very curious about the 3% who said other, and maybe you could type into the chat and we can gather it up and tell everybody a little later. You know, what are your ideas? Because there are some great ideas out there. So please share them, and we'll let everybody know what they are a little bit later. So you're right, all those are great baits. Here's some kind of maybe outside the box ideas that you might try. One thing is use 2 kinds of bait at once, and don't use 2 kinds of fish. So believe it or not, there are some cats out there who don't like tuna fish and don't like fish at all. So you want to put a canned cat food, like a chicken or meat-based one, with your fish bait. That way you're going to get them with one or the other. Don't be afraid to experiment, as long as it's pungent and it's juicy and it doesn't have some harmful ingredient like onions, onion powder, something like that in it. Give it a try. Like we have found that Maui cats love Spam. Who would have thought, right? But they go nuts about it. So that's become one of our favorite baits here. I mentioned Fancy Feast. Mackerel is a fish that often gets overlooked, but it's not expensive and it's got a lot of juice and it's very, very smelly. So that can work. You can also try herbal stuff. That what you see here pictured in the container is a combination catnip and silvervine. And that is going along the ideas of using 2 kinds of bait, because actually some cats don't like catnip, but they will be attracted to silvervine. So if you use a combination, you're going to get both. Valerian root is this really smelly stuff. It stinks to us and is very attractive to cats. And you can just put a few drops on just behind on a piece of paper towel or in the bait dish, just behind the trip plate, or even on the trip plate, and that will often work. If you've got a hard to catch tomcat, this is like a lot of not a lot, but a few professional trappers have advised this, and it's really quite a great trick, which is talk to your clinic and see if they can get you a urine sample from a cat in heat who's about to be spayed, because they're going to express her bladder anyway. So capture that urine and use it, soak up a paper towel, put it in your trap or under your drop trap, and your hard to catch tomcat is going to be, most of the time, they're going to be very attracted and want to come over and check that out. But it only has a shelf life of about 24 hours. So you want to use it right away. What you put your bait in matters. You have to make sure you don't interfere with the trip plate. We found what are called food boats, also called French fry plates, are excellent. They're water resistant, so they don't get soggy and stuff. You can buy them in bulk online. Just make sure you get a small enough size. They come in all different sizes, and a smaller one is what you need. In windy conditions, you can put a piece of duct tape on the bottom of it and then stick it in the back of the trap. You can also use clothespins to attach the food bowl to the side of the trap. Again, this would be for windy conditions. We mentioned the trap mat, and here's just a close-up of what that looks like, creating a little bit of a bait trail. Again, you can do the same thing with cardboard. You can also make a trail. We highly recommend this outside the trap too, leading from a few feet away up to the front door. You can either pour the juice from your tuna or your mackerel and create a trail, or get like a treat like Pounce and crumple it up and make that trail. Just don't overdo it. Don't put a ton of bait on your trap mat. Don't put a ton of, make a big trail, because the idea is that you're giving them just enough so that they keep wanting to move forward and get to the main course. Okay, now we're going to get into trapping. So any questions about preparing the traps before we move on to that?
At this point in time, I'm going to defer on the questions. There really aren't that many out there that can't wait until the end, but I will fill people in on what we're getting for other items. So the other items were whatever a caretaker feeds. Fried chicken, KFC, Popeyes, and some people hang the KFC from the top of the trap so the cat's looking at the KFC and not the plate.
That's clever. Yeah.
Fried liver, canned mackerel, and jarred baby food.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, just be careful with the baby food that you don't have, you know, onions or anything like that in it. But yeah, that's very clever. You know, I like the idea of hanging the drumstick from the back of the trap. You know, the movement might attract them too. So that's interesting. Okay, so we're going to show a short video here. It's about 6 minutes long, which goes over the basics of kind of a mass trapping. Same principles apply if you're trying to just catch one cat at a time. And then we'll go into kind of more esoteric trips, but I want to make sure everybody's got the basics down. So here we go.
Start off the trapping by lining up all the traps, rear doors facing you, at a reasonable distance away from the cat's territory so you don't scare them off while you're getting ready. It's always best to have more traps than cats. It makes it a lot easier when you're down to the last cat or two if you're trying to get them with 4 or 5 traps rather than just 1 or 2. Typically, we use 2 kinds of bait in case there's a cat that likes one and not the other. Good smelly stuff like cheap tuna works best. When all the traps are ready to go, place most or all of them out into the cat's territory at the same time. You want to enter the territory as little as possible because every time you walk in, you might scare a cat away who won't return anytime soon. Spread the traps out, covering as much of the territory as possible around where the cats are used to eating. It's always better to lean the trap up against something like the curb or a fence or a wall to make it look like it's part of another structure. It makes the cats less wary of going in. When you go to pick up a trapped cat, cover the trap right away with a sheet and give the cat a minute to calm down. Covering them will have this calming effect. After you remove a trap, place a fresh one in the same spot. You'll often find there are hot spots where cats keep going in. Even with food being withheld for a day, some of the cats probably still won't enter the traps the first time you try. There's always a few who are more cautious or don't show up or for whatever reason don't go in. To catch them, you have to make them go longer without food, which is why we recommend scheduling at least 2, preferably 3 days for the trapping. The extra time also leaves room for bad weather or other unexpected conditions. In some feral colonies, the cats may be used to people and appear friendly. Nonetheless, for your safety, you should still use traps because it's unpredictable how the cats will react to being handled.
I know where cats go.
Okay, you go for it.
One trick is to make a trail of bait going into the trap, using the juice from tuna, bits of food, or by crumbling up a cat treat like Pounce. If a trapped cat is eating quietly and not getting upset, then leave her alone and don't immediately run in to cover her. At that point, there's no reason to risk entering the territory and possibly scaring away an untrapped cat. If she starts getting anxious and moving back and forth, then you need to cover and remove her.
Hi, sweetie.
Normally, traps should not be left unattended, but should be watched from a distance. Sometimes, though, that is impossible. In those cases, drape the sheet over the sides of the trap, leaving the front and rear doors uncovered so the cat is able to see all the way through. When a cat is trapped, the sheet will give him some sense of security prior to your arrival.
Go. Good one.
Okay, so just to quickly touch on some of the highlight, not to go into a lot of details since you just heard it, but to go over some of the highlights there. You want to prepare the traps at a distance from the feeding area. Make sure you have more traps than cats. Put all the traps out at once if you're doing a mass trapping to minimize the number of times you're in the territory. You're basically carpeting the feeding area and the pathways to it, and try to allow multiple days for trapping so you don't get rained out. Place the traps against structures. Don't leave traps out in the open. The more you can make them look like they're part of the cat's normal environment, the less wary that they'll be. For some reason, cats will, if you catch a cat at a certain spot, put another trap there, and you'll just find there are some locations where the cats just keep going in and others where they just never go in. Don't rush in to cover a cat if the cat is calm. If you can't directly monitor the traps, then leave the sides covered, but never just leave the area. Always be within at least hearing distance, and preferably be able to see what's going on. And don't try to force friendly cats into traps. That almost never works and often results in pretty bad scratches or bites. Okay, so let's get into some of the tips to support this kind of these basic ideas. So one of the things you want to do is try to use the caretaker's routine. have the caretaker go through a fake feeding at the usual time, and this will often draw the cats out. Have them drive or walk up the way they usually do, call the cats in the same way, crack a can of food open, shake a container of dry food, put out empty plates. And you can often do this repeatedly throughout a trapping session. You do it at the beginning, you catch some cats, some others run away. An hour later, you have the caretaker come back and do it again. You get diminishing returns over time, but the presence of the caretaker is often very attractive to the cats coming out. However, if know who you're dealing with, if you have a person who's very difficult, who doesn't follow instructions, who knows everything and is telling you what to do when they have no idea, probably better not to invite them into work without that trick. Laser pointers are really great things for attracting cats. They you know, if they're not particularly hungry, they may, if they catch sight of the little red fly moving around, they might run over to get it. And sometimes you can run the cats right into the trap using a laser pointer. A good tip is don't go out and buy one of those laser pointers that you see in pet stores, because they use very expensive batteries that run out quickly. You want to go and get this thing called a PowerPoint clicker presentation remote control pen. And that just uses like normal AA batteries and lasts quite a long time and is much, much cheaper in the long run. I mean, we're talking normal batteries as opposed to batteries that are like $8, $9, $10 each. You can use kittens as bait for the mother. If you do this live, you can put the kittens in a carrier, put the carrier behind the rear of the trap, the box trap, cover the carrier and the back of the trap with a sheet so that visually the only way the mom can get to the kittens is by going into the trap and going towards the rear of it. But limit the amount of time that you attempt this, especially the younger the kittens are. You know, you don't want to leave them out there for a long time, especially if it's hot out or things like that. But you know, it's often worth a try if mom's around, you've got the kittens and she's not coming out. When she hears her babies crying, very good chance she's going to come and try to get near them. Now you can also fake it by using a YouTube video, and do a search on YouTube for kittens calling for mom, and you'll find a ton of videos. Try to get one that you know, lasts for a few minutes. Play the video on your phone, and if you're like us, you'll sacrifice your phone, although we've never had it totally damaged, and put the phone on top of the trap or inside the drop trap if that's what you're doing, and let it play. And it's amazing how well this can work and how kittens will come running over to try to find their mother. And the reverse is true as well. You can use YouTube videos of mom cats calling for their kittens or kittens calling for their mom cats to get mom to come. Yeah, I'm sorry, I think search, did I just do that in reverse? Kittens calling for mom, I'm sorry, kittens calling for mom will attract the mother calling for kittens will attract the kittens. And just again, play the video, put the phone on top of the trap or inside the drop trap. If you play what we talked about before, which is kittens calling, you may also attract other kittens who are looking for their litter mates. When you're just trapping kittens, a technique to try is if you're afraid that they're too small to set off the trap, which can happen if they're, you know, they're only 1.5 pounds or 2 pounds. What you want to do is a technique called setting the trigger lightly. And with a tomahawk trap, which is pictured here, you're going to put the tip of the trigger hook on the brass crossbar, or a brass cylinder in this case. And it's just the very tip, and that will minimize the amount of weight that's needed to set the trap off. If you're using a true catch, you're going to rest the tips of both crossbars against each other. And that is also going to make it so that very little weight is needed to set the trap off. Another trick For cats who do successfully avoid the trip plate, especially if you're using a trap with a smaller trip plate and maybe haven't extended it, maybe you had to move fast, but you see the cat going into the trap, leaning over, eating the bait. So what you want to do first is you want to get the cat out of the trap, but you don't want to frighten him so much that he won't come back. So you want to walk over slowly. Don't run over, don't shout, don't overly frighten him. Just let him slowly back out of the trap. Sometimes on their way backing out, they'll set the trip plate off. But if they don't and they leave the trap, then you can rearrange it like this. Put a piece of newspaper covering the trip plate front and in front of it and back of it. So basically they can't see where the trip plate is. And then take a stick and about an inch or two, maybe 2 inches off the ground, put the stick through the sides of the trap and just in front of the trip plate. So now your cat knows there's food in there. He's coming back once you've walked away to get another bite, but now he can't see where the trip plate is and he has to step over this bar and boom, he comes down on the trip plate. Putting traps side by side is also another trick. As you can see in the top photo, and those of you who've trapped a lot will know this, that cats often, they don't want to go in the trap. So they try to find a way to get to the bait without doing that. And the first thing they'll often do is go to the back of the trap and see if there's some way they can get at the bait. And by putting traps side by side with the front doors facing opposite directions, you're able to take advantage of this tendency because there's the route. The cat doesn't have to go all the way around to the front. He can walk in through the trap that's next to the bait and move in that way. You're more likely to get him starting to go into the trap that way. Don't stare. Cats are very sensitive, especially if you're not somebody they're used to or you're acting in a way that is different from what they're used to. So it's really tempting. It's just human nature, at the moment of truth and the cat's approaching and is he going to go in or is he isn't, and you're just watching intently. Well, they can pick that up. They can pick up that you're staring at them. And especially if you make eye contact with them, and they may perceive that as threatening, and that could cause them to back off. So you want to instead try to blend into the scenery, sit in your car, and then you can stare all you want as you look out the windshield. Be behind a bush or inside where you can, indoors where you can still see out, or stand around the corner if you have to. But don't be a helicopter hovering too close. Okay, selective trapping. This is where we're gonna just touch on this, and this is the drop trap. We have a quick video to show you how you can use. This is a situation where the black cat was pregnant that you see in this photo. The other cats were fixed, but so we just wanted to get her, and this is how we used a drop trap to do it.
What's up?
You're gonna pull the string. I'll say when. Pull.
Okay, so there you see an example of the drop trap in action, and why it can be such a great tool. And so that's why, again, we're going to devote a whole webinar to it, which of course you're welcome to join us on June 29th. Now, you can do what we call a poor man's drop trap, and that's where you use a water bottle, and basically you take about a 1 liter bottle, fill it up about halfway with water, and tie a string around the base, or some trappers prefer around the neck. And then you don't use the trigger mechanism or the trip plate, but you prop the front door on top of the bottle, and you put a big plate of bait in the back, because you may have cats going in who you don't want to catch, and you need to wait for the one that you're waiting for. And then, of course, when the cat you want is all the way in, you give it a good yank. The big trick is practice first, because just do it even once before you do it live, because you need to understand what the feel of it is. Because when the moment of truth arrives, if there's any hesitation, like you don't yank hard enough right away, or the string isn't taut, or whatever it might be, that cat just needs a split second to get out of the trap. So practice first. Okay, keeping critters out of your traps. The best way to do that is to feed them something that they like and the cats don't, and be sure to put enough of it out. And here's just a few examples. With raccoons, you could put out white bread, sweet corn. They love marshmallows. Skunks like nuts. They like peanut butter on bread. They also like fruits. Possum like acorns. Tomatoes, fruit as well, and chickens like chicken feed or bird seed. And you just put a generous pile of that a short distance away from your traps, or scattered around the traps, and they're much more likely to go eat these foods, but it's not going to distract the cats from going in after the bait. If you do catch wildlife, which is going to happen sometimes, here's some tricks for how to get them out safely. With raccoons, you have to be very careful, because they have incredible hands. Basically, they have these long, sharp claws, and they can reach through the trap. And if you get a scratch, you're in trouble. You're probably going to have to get a rabies prophylaxis and all that. So be very careful with raccoons. They're very gentle animals, but be careful when one's in a trap. We want to use, we have taken poles and had 2 people lift the trap and carry it away, so there's no risk of getting scratched carrying it, or else use like scratch-proof gloves. If all that fails, just make sure you hold the trap at distance and not let it be near your side. If you can, section, and you have a divider, section the raccoon off in the back where the mesh of the trap is tighter and they can't reach out as easily, and release them near a tree or a wooded area. And as soon as you open the rear door, step back quickly and let them go on their way. With skunks, of course, the big fear is getting sprayed. You can easily avoid that if you know what to do. So you want to approach them with a heavy blanket in front of you. So if anything gets sprayed, it's going to be the blanket. Approach them from the rear, because they won't spray at something they can't see, and then quickly throw the blanket from a distance. That's why it needs to be heavy. Throw it from a little distance over the trap. Then you can open the rear door and just stand back and let them go out. If you see them stamping their feet, that means they're about to spray, and you want to back off as quickly as you can. With possum, again, very gentle animals. The big thing about them is more for their safety. They're nearly blind during the daytime, so you want to carry your trap over next to a tree so that they can quickly go out and get right up into a safe spot. If you're dealing with chickens, let them go. They're really not much of a threat, but do be careful if you have a mother hen with chicks, because she'd probably be pretty angry that you've got her chicks, or you've got her and the chicks in a trap. So just avoid getting pecked as they leave. But that's pretty rare. Mostly all you have to do is let the door open and they're on their way. Okay, so we'd like to end with a tale that combines a lot of these tips and tricks that we're talking about. And this is what we call the trapping of Lily. And this kitty lived at a hotel in this wall. It was a wall of giant boulders, probably about 20 feet high or so. And there were multiple other cats around, like this fellow that you see here. And what happened was we caught a feral kitten who lived in these boulders pretty high up. She was too wild at that point to be adopted, and there were no homes available to socialize her. So we did the best we could. We got her fixed, and we brought her back and let her go. And she went back into this wall. Well, the next day, somebody who worked there said that he wanted to adopt her because we had caught another kitten. He wanted the two of them to be together. He was also leaving for a long vacation in a few days, so there wasn't much time. And we were kind of like, how do we trap a feral kitten who lives in a giant brick and bouldered wall who we just let go? So we decided we'd give it a shot. When we arrived to attempt it, we discovered a giant plate of half-eaten food at the bottom of the wall. So just to make things even harder, she probably wasn't hungry. So this is how we went about it. We decided, first of all, to trap in the middle of a hot day because we figured this is a colony of about 15 to 20 cats. We figured the adults would be asleep in the heat of the day. They would not be roaming around, so they wouldn't interfere. We also figured that kittens need to eat a lot more, so there's a better chance that she would be hungry when other cats were not. And we took the trap and we completely wrapped it in green sunscreen cloth. And just so you can see, here's Lily. She was up there in the wall. So we camouflaged the trap and we put that down at the base of the wall under some bushes. And we used sardines as bait. And then we spotted Lily, as you can see in this photo, peering out from up about 20 feet up. So she wasn't interested in coming down at that point and just kind of watched us. So what we did, we had a laser pointer with us. We figured, look, if we can at least get her moving around, we have a chance as opposed to her going to sleep. So we started shining the laser pointer above her head, and sure enough, she caught sight of it and started to chase after it. So at that point, we were hoping we could lead her down with the laser pointer, but she wasn't having any of that either. She stayed up there. So the next thing we did was we took out our iPhones and we started playing a YouTube video of kittens meowing, and we placed the phone at the bottom of the wall near the trap and just stepped away. Moments after the video started playing, we saw her starting to come down the wall. So we stepped away, we waited a few minutes, and sure enough, we heard the trap shut. And Lily was able to go to her new home. So that shows you how you can, use these tricks and tips, be creative, don't give up, just keep trying different things, and you can succeed. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. And in whatever time we have left, we can take questions. Oh,
Excellent.
yeah, but
Great.
I'm happy to stay on and take more.
Okay, sounds good. I do have a few questions that I've been saving. So a couple around being around telling when you adopt a female cat, whether they're a nursing mom and kittens and how to find the kittens and when to return the nursing mom and will the nursing mom, take care of the kittens. So do you have any thoughts on that issue?
Yeah, well, first of all, if you know a mom is nursing, then probably you want to do whatever you can to avoid trapping her. If you do trap her, we are very reluctant, unless this is a cat who's a very familiar cat who you're sure you can trap again. You don't want to release her. If it's a situation you may not get her again, you want to bring her in, get her fixed, try to have a veterinarian do a flank spay if they know how to do that. If the kittens are very young, have them do a drug reversal. and then mommy can be released as soon as she is alert. And with the flank spay, it won't be painful for her to continue to nurse right after surgery, and they will continue to nurse post-spay. On the other hand, if you don't find out the cat is nursing until after you've trapped her and during the surgery, then you have to ask yourself, maybe the veterinarian is able to tell you how old the kittens probably are. And then you can judge, is there a chance they're not alive because mommy's, been away for too long? Like if they're were just born and you've had her in a trap for 3 days, not much of a chance they're going to survive, and there's no point in rushing her back out. On the other hand, if the kittens are 3 weeks old, mommy's only been gone for a day, then you probably want to get her fixed, drug reversed, and back outside as quickly as possible.
Are there standard veterinary protocols with regards to doing, spays and neuters for TNR cats? One question came out about pain meds, and some organizations aren't administering pain meds to the ferals. And so just to know if there was something sort of written out there that had like standards of protocol.
Yeah, I think that really varies widely among programs, and I would have to defer that question to a veterinarian. I'm just not, I know some have that we've worked with and some haven't. The cats all seem to be fine either way, but you'd really have to, somebody who's qualified veterinarian would have to answer that.
How cold is too cold to trap cats?
It's never too cold to trap cats. As long as you, if it's below freezing, it's very cold out, then you need to be able to monitor the traps very quickly, closely, and then when you have a trapped cat, quickly remove them and put them into a warm space. If you can do that, then it doesn't matter how cold it is. In the Northeast, we prefer trapping in the winter because there are fewer kittens and nursing mothers, and it's just a lot simpler. But we also have, in cold conditions, we've camouflaged traps by wrapping them in blankets. So if we couldn't get there for a few minutes, they would have some warmth. So it's all about what you wouldn't want to do is put a bunch of traps out and come back an hour later in really frigid conditions. Then you might cause harm to the cat. But if you can keep a close eye on them, they're fine. I mean, they have really thick coats. They're running around in the winter. So if they're out there looking for food and being able to be trapped, then it's fine to catch them.
Is there a specific time frame that you keep a cat after she's had a difficult spay, if she's had like a pyometria or something like that?
Again, you're going to want to consult with the veterinarian about that. Most programs will hold cats at least overnight before they're released, and in the vast majority of cases, that will be fine. We do like to hold a cat for an extra day or two if they've had a difficult surgery, if there's room and it's possible to do that. So, really anywhere from 24 to 72 hours is an acceptable recovery time. Longer than that, probably you want to have a very good reason because you're starting to stress the cat out and they really don't need more than that. So for the vast majority of cats, 24 hours is going to be fine, 48 hours is fine. 72 is probably unnecessary, but still not causing any harm. But beyond that, you could, start causing them to stress out and get sick.
Okay. We have a request if you can go back in your presentation to the page with foods for wildlife again. Would you be willing to flip back to that while we do a few more questions?
Sure.
Okay, great. Excellent. So we have a couple questions around feeders who refuse to pull food, as well as grumpy neighbors, and any tips for either of those parties?
Yeah, if you've got people who refuse to withhold food, there's two ways to work around that. One is find out what their patterns are, and then trap before they show up. So if they usually come and feed at noon, then you want to trap in the morning. You also probably want to rely on using a drop trap, which we'll cover in the next webinar, because the cats don't need to be as hungry in order to go under them. As far as grumpy neighbors go, it's about explaining the benefits of what you're doing. First thing you would want to do is talk to them and find out, why are you grumpy? they'll say, well, we don't like the cats, and then you have to ask them, what don't you like about the cats? And it's usually, well, they're making noise, or their backyard smells, and they're fighting all the time. And if you explain to them by getting them fixed, you're going to be mitigating and almost eliminating a lot of these problems, then they're much more likely to be supportive. You could also talk to them about simple ways to keep cats off their property, like motion activated sprinklers, things like that. So the basic idea is find out what their problems are, be a good listener, and then try to help them solve those problems.
Are there any other deterrents that you recommend other than the sprinklers?
Some people swear by the ultrasonic devices, which send out a high-pitched noise that's irritating to cats. The thing is, you really do have to know how to use them properly, where to position them, and what kind of range they're good for. So a lot of people buy them and they just don't use them properly, and then they think they don't work. So we like the motion activated sprinklers much more because they're very simple and they're 100% effective. Cats will not go. They will not enter an infrared field that's covered by that will set off a sprinkler.
So there's been lots of follow-up comments with regards to when is it too cold to trap? Lots of worries about the shaved area on the female cat for a spay in the wintertime. Do you have any follow-up comments to that?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent concern. And the way that we would solve that is that we would make sure that there was warm winter shelter in the cat's territory before we would do winter trapping. So as long as they have warm shelter and it's packed with straw and they have a safe place and a warm place to rest, we haven't seen any problems with the females in the wintertime. Also, you want to, to the extent you can, you want to work with veterinarians who are very experienced with spay-neuter of community cats, because they'll tend to shave less off and have much smaller incisions, and there's less skin that's going to be exposed. But we have not, as long as we know shelter is in place, we have not had cats dying from exposure.
If you had a feral cat inside for 6 months with no progress of integration in the home, is the best thing to do to release it back to the colony?
It all depends at what age you took the cat in. So if the cat was a little kitten, 8, 9, 10 weeks old, 6 months is a long time. They may not, have as much familiarity. On the other hand, if you took a cat in when they were 6 months old or 8 months or an adult, they're definitely going to remember where they came from. But even with little kittens, if you put them back where they came from, that's all they know when it comes to outdoors. And there's a good chance that they'll click in and they'll remember their territory. So 6 months is pushing it when you're talking about, having brought in a kitten, but it should be fine if you're talking about an adult.
My last question was a question that came in earlier from a person who's a veterinary student, and she's trapped some cats. Unfortunately, one of her cats has gotten out of the trap, and I think even before it's been spayed or neutered at the holding location. And now that cat is up and trapped in the ceiling of the area that they're holding them. She's worried she can't get the cat trapped. She's just looking for any ideas. And I think we all know that accidents do happen. I've certainly had many feral cats under people's bathtubs in their bathrooms, thinking no one would ever have access through whatever little door there was or whatever. So we've had these situations that cats have gotten out of their contained situation. And do you have any sort of tips for when the situation goes awry?
Yeah, that's why we recommend 2 dividers, because we've had cats escape. Once you've experienced that, you don't want it to happen again. So what I would do is bait a couple of traps, cover them with sheets, and put them in dark spaces within the holding space, like dark, in the corners, and camouflage the trap, and cover the floor of the trap with cardboard or something that doesn't have the feel of a wire floor. And try to do everything you can to not make it look like what she was just in. And, put a generous portion of food in there. Now, if you can get her down from the ceiling, there is a technique called running a cat into a trap. And what you basically have to do is you have to remove all as many of the hiding places that you can, and you put a trap behind like a large board or behind a piece of furniture, so that's the only hiding place that's left in the holding spaces where the trap is. And you cover up the trap so it doesn't look like a trap. Again, you're putting it behind something, and then you flush the cat out from wherever they're hiding, and their instinct is going to be to go find another place to hide. If where you put the trap is the only place they can go, there's a very good chance that they're going to go run into the trap. And if you go to our website, neighborhoodcats.org, click on how to TNR, then click on trapping. You'll see a page that's called Hard to Catch Cats. And on that page, we detail this technique of luring, of running a cat into a trap who's indoors.
So Kristen, if you're out there, it might be possible for you to switch over and put the closing slide up. And then Brian, maybe can you share with folks what you have in the handout section?
Sure. We have a copy of the Neighborhood Cats TNR Handbook, our second edition, and it contains tons of ideas about, including that last one I was talking about, running a cat into a trap indoors. There's photos and explanations. So lots of trapping tips, also lots of colony caretaking tips. And we cover really just about every issue you can think of when you're doing hands-on TNR work. So feel free to, to download that and have a look and see if there's anything in there, that might be useful.
So before you sign out, before we close down, folks, I recommend you go to that handouts tab, and then you can download the handbook from there. We'll make sure it's accessible in other ways too, but it's a good way to grab it right now. I just picked it off the list right now, so I have it downloaded on my whatever download section on my computer. And so I think at this point in time, I just would like to remind everybody that the next webinar is going to be on the drop trap. And it's Saturday, June 29th, 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Registration's open at communitycatspodcast.com. Susie, if you're out there, I'm just going to turn your mic on for a bit. Can you unmute yourself, Susie, just so you can say hello to the whole group?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you everybody so much for joining us today. It's Saturday, and we really appreciate your taking time out to learn some tips and tricks. We've spent a lot of hours out in the field and pretty much done everything the wrong way. So then the light bulb goes on, and so I'm really happy to be able to share some ideas and hope that it helps as you go out there and trap those cats. So thanks again for joining us.
Awesome. Brian, is there a specific, I would assume if they just go to the Neighborhood Cats website, folks can find you both there?
Yeah, absolutely. Or just email us at info@neighborhoodcats.org, and we'll be able to see it.
Good. And then if folks are interested in finding out more about the Community Cats podcast, it's www.communitycatspodcast.com. Again, I want to thank Brian and Susie so much for partnering up with us on this webinar series. Kristen, you have anything you want to say to the group?
Nope. I think everybody's done a great job today, and I'm excited to try some of the new tricks that we just learned.
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, and we'll see you all in June.